Robert Reich has been the US Secretary of Labor under Bill Clinton, an economic advisor to Barack Obama, a public intellectual, and until recently a college professor. And he's also today's guest on this episode of the Prospect podcast. My name is Benjamin Clark, and it's a great pleasure to speak with you today, Bob.
Well, Benjamin, it's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
You've written this new memoir, Coming Up Short, which is now out in the UK. One of the key motifs in the book is about bullies versus those who they bully, beginning from your experience of being bullied as a child through to your perception of Donald Trump as a sort of quintessential bully. For those who haven't read the book yet, I'd love to hear you speak about your experience of bullying growing up and how that's shaped your view of American politics today.
Sure. Well, first of all, you've got to understand I'm very short and always have been relative to others of my age. And so when I was a little boy, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, I was bullied, intimidated, made fun of, ridiculed, and sometimes assaulted by other little boys and bigger boys. And well, I think it did frame my understanding of what the purpose of life together is, in the sense that I understood, and certainly this happened by the time I was a young man, I understood that bullying really is a metaphor for all sorts of abuses of power, men bullying women, or white supremacists bullying black people and brown people, or employers bullying employees. It really is about power. And our moral responsibility, at least that's my lifelong conviction, is to protect the weak from the strong, to protect the people who have less power from the people who have more power.
Yeah, and I found in that part of the book, a particularly sort of moving and powerful passage was the story of Michael Schwerner. Just for those who haven't read the book yet as well, would you like to just sort of, walk them through, your friendship, I guess, with him when you were young?
Well, yes, because I was quite vulnerable at the age of 4, 5, 6 years old, I looked for older boys who could essentially protect me from the bullies. And Mickey, as I understood him, was one of those. It was in the summer. I was visiting my grandma at her cabin in the Adirondack Mountains. And Mickey was somewhat older, about 5 years older than I was, and very, very kind. And a boy who really radiated a kind of goodness. I don't know how else to say that. And so he kept the bullies at bay. I lost contact with Mickey for many years. I didn't need protectors any longer. I was old enough to take care of myself, and the bullying declined, as it does when you get a little bit older. But I was entering college. I was 18 years old in the summer of 1964, and I discovered what had happened to Mickey. Mickey's full name, Michael Schwerner. He, along with 2 other civil rights workers in Mississippi, were trying to register voters, black voters, and the Ku Klux Klan murdered him and the two other civil rights workers. Well, you can imagine when I heard that my protector had been murdered by the real bullies of America, the bullies who were intent on not only white supremacy, but intent on violence and the use of violence to maintain themselves and their status. Well, everything changed for me. That's when I saw bullying all around me. I think, looking back on it, that's when my life really did. My adult life, my understanding of my, if you will, calling became clear.
Yeah, and so fast forwarding a little bit from that, those chapters on when you were younger to your experiences in government. Once you entered the Clinton administration, you became locked in a series of internal debates in the Democratic Party that became known as the the Battle of the Bobs. Would you mind sort of explaining for those who weren't around at the time what the Battle of the Bobs was? I mean, my understanding is it was a contest around ideas around economic inequality and how to fight them. Now, those ideas, those battles seem to be, again, very current in the Democratic Party today, so I think it might be instructive. So, yeah, if you could describe the battle of the ideas in context, but also the relevance for current debates.
Well, yes, it is as part of the current debate. And the other Bob was Bob Rubin, who was Secretary of the Treasury when I was Secretary of Labor in the Clinton administration. It wasn't really a battle in the sense that I like him. I still like him. I don't see him very often. But we had very, very sharply different views on the nature of the challenge ahead. He thought that inequality was not really a major problem, even though it was growing. He thought the biggest problem was the federal budget deficit, and that we had to get the deficit down, and that if we were concerned about inequality, we ought to be doing something for the very poor. I kept on arguing with him that it was growing inequality itself that was the problem, and that if we brought the deficit down by cutting the kinds of programs that Bill Clinton had promised to institute in education and training and better jobs and higher minimum wage and all sorts of things, that actually inequality would continue to widen, and that would have a devastating effect on the entire country, on the sort of moral authority of America in the world, but also that it would generate eventually a lot of anger among the working middle class. And it would, I said publicly, I mean, sadly, there are a number of occasions when I said it that are still available for people to listen to. And I say sadly because I hate to listen to them. I hate to hear from 1992 what I was saying. But I said then that if we don't do anything about this widening inequality, we're going to eventually have a demagogue as president who will pick on immigrants and pick on the poor and pick on gay people and go after all of the vulnerable people in the country and make them scapegoats for the anger that the middle class and the working class become, are feeling toward a system that is rigged against them. Well, that obviously has happened, and the current debate in the Democratic Party is how much we need to go to the so-called center and be a party that stands for, and you have this in the Labor Party, and it certainly echoes around the world, be a party that is quote unquote responsible, in that fiscal prudence and sort of good government principles dominate. Well, my point of view then, and it is now, is that you can't have a center between democracy and neo-fascism or authoritarianism. There is no reasonable center between those two poles. The problem is really that we have more and more of a authoritarian, neo-fascist center growing in America, in the world. It's not really a center at all. It's kind of right-wing crazy. Donald Trump is part of this. Now, luckily, Viktor Orban, the people of Hungary did see this. They managed to, in a very spectacular and important way, they managed to get rid of Viktor Orban. But you see it in Israel. Netanyahu is a neo-fascist, and so is obviously Putin. Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping in China, and Donald Trump, and we've got to respond to this neo-fascism. We've got to create societies that really are fair, that are just. Social justice is not just some kind of fig leaf. I mean, social justice really does have to be at the center of our of our thinking, because otherwise this tidal wave of authoritarianism, which is backed by billionaires, let's be clear about this. In the United States, it is the billionaire class that is supporting Donald Trump, that made sure he was put in for the first time in 2016 and was reelected in 2024. They are pushing big tax cuts for themselves. They want to get rid of government regulations that impede their corporations and their huge fortunes. They want to speed the adaptation of AI, and that's going to, if there's unregulated AI, that's dangerous for the world, and it's going to undercut and result in a loss of huge numbers of jobs. But the billionaire class doesn't care, and we're going to have even more of an authoritarian takeover if we're not careful.
Yeah, so speaking of right-wing crazy, as you as you just said, you previously were the Secretary for Labor under Bill Clinton, and Trump has been doing some rather interesting things in the Labor Department, specifically towards the Bureau of Labor Statistics. He seems to be kind of mad at that agency for it truthfully cataloging evidence on the economy. I'd be interested, as a former Secretary of Labor, if you could explain to us the actions that he's taking and what some of those implications might be of what are like quite extraordinary interventions.
Well, they're extraordinary, but they're not complicated, Ben. I mean, he fired the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics because he didn't like it reporting that unemployment was growing and wages were not keeping up with inflation. He has tried to get rid of the head of the Federal Reserve Board because the Fed chair, the central bank chair, has refused to reduce interest rates in the face of inflation, which is exactly what the Fed chair should do or should not do. I mean, the Fed chair that he put in recently is in a very difficult position. You don't want a president to be as a dictator would, interfering in economic policymaking in these ways, which undercut the confidence of the entire economy and the global economy in in America. But I could go on. I mean, just a couple of days from before we are doing this interview, um, the he made a settlement. First of all, he sued the Internal Revenue Service, our tax policy and our tax collecting agency, um, for $10 billion for during his first term, uh, allegedly leaking information, uh, truthful information, that he had paid no income taxes for years. I mean, this is a man who has violated, almost every tenet of American law and all of the norms of our presidency. Every president up till Donald Trump, in certainly in modern memory, has released their tax returns as a matter of course. He refused to do that. And when they were leaked to the New York Times, he sues the IRS. Well, he first of all he insists that he runs the Justice Department now. Now, how can you sue a part of the government where you are running the government? You can't possibly do that. There is, who's going to be on the other side? Who's going to represent the taxpayers if you are suing the IRS and the federal government for $10 billion, and you are president of the United States who insists that you are also in charge of the Justice Department? Well, to make a long story very short, he is settling with the Justice Department, with us taxpayers, for a slush fund of about $1.8 billion that allows him to compensate anybody who, in his judgment, has been the victim of retribution against him. So this slush fund is going to allow him to, for example, compensate the 1,500 people who rioted against, the government of the United States uh, in January 6, 2021, who rioted against the U.S. Capitol. endangering the lives of all of our representatives and senators, uh, resulting in 5 deaths. And he's going to, most of these people did go to prison, and he's already pardoned them, and he's going to compensate them for damages. For what damages? I want to just make sure you and every listener understand the breadth and horror of this dictatorship we have. And I use the term dictatorship advisedly. This is not a president that the founders of the republic and the founders of our democracy contemplated when they put the Constitution of the United States together. This is not an Article II president. I think we can't even talk about him as president of the United States.
Yeah, interesting. So just rolling back slightly to one of your previous answers there. I mean, you're talking about the Battle of the Bobs and some of those internal debates and how you warned that it might lead to a sort of demagogic figure like Trump coming in future. One of the passages in your book that I found quite interesting was when you talked about the theme of bullying and related that to some of Trump's supporters. And you said, in what might be controversial to some people's minds, you said that some of Trump's supporters, they have been bullied by the economic system. There have been some people who have argued that, based on recent research, for instance, they've complicated this notion that Trump supporters are economically downtrodden, for instance. You mentioned January 6th, there were a whole lot of actually rather well-off small business owners, for instance, storming the Capitol. Why did you characterize some of them in the book as having been bullied by the system? And should non-Trump voters, how should they relate to them? Should they relate to them sympathetically or not?
Well, I can't tell anybody else how to relate to Trump supporters, but I am sympathetic to them in the sense that most of them. Now, there are obviously outliers. We're talking about a large group of people, but most of them are working class people. As Secretary of Labor, I met many of them in the earlier forms of the MAGA movement in the 1990s. I saw their anger. They felt that they were being kind of rigged. Yes, the system was rigged. They were the victims of a system that was causing them to lose ground. And I understood that, and they were right. And then after the financial crisis of 2008, many of them concluded, I think appropriately, that the bankers got bailed out, and no major banker went to jail, but millions of them, that is, working class people, lost their homes, and they lost their savings, they lost their jobs, and they're furious about a system that had revealed itself, even if they were before that time unaware. By the time of the fiscal crisis and the banking crisis of 2008, they became very aware of the rigging of the system. And it was after that point that we had, on the right, we had the Tea Party movement, so-called, and then on the left, we had the Occupy movement in the United States. And those two movements were very overlapping. They were similar. And the Tea Party movement eventually led to Donald Trump. He was the lineal descendant of the Tea Party movement. And on the left, the Occupy movement led to Bernie Sanders, who both of these people were not politicians at the time. I mean, even at the start of 2016, when both of them began to run for president, I mean, Bernie Sanders was not even a Democrat. He was an independent. He was a democratic socialist. He then became a Democrat, and Donald Trump was not even a Republican. He then registered as a Republican. The point is that these two men, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, became extremely popular in the run-up to the election of 2016 because in many people's minds they stood for the same thing: anti-establishment, progressive populism. Now, obviously, Donald Trump proved himself not to be a progressive populist. But the important thing is that the people who supported both of them were overlapping. They had many of the same concerns, and those concerns were about the unfairness of a system dominated by big money.
Yeah, interesting. And I guess Democrats speaking to some of those concerns might help them win some of those supporters back potentially. I guess one element of that is trade, and what we might think of as sort of neoliberal policies. For instance, NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, for instance, which was a big deal in your time in the Clinton administration and after as well. Um, just a quick side note. So you helped create the American Prospect, a magazine that is, despite the similar name, different to Prospect UK, my employer, and who we're speaking on the podcast now. But one of your co-founders, Paul Starr of that American Prospect, he recently reviewed your book in the magazine, and he wrote the following. He says, Bob doesn't say much in his memoir about the considerable change in his politics since he burst into national prominence. He thinks that you were perhaps a bit more neoliberal in your politics back then, a bit more in favour of NAFTA and these sort of things than it might seem in your book. What do you make of this criticism that your politics might have changed a little bit more than you're letting on? And what have you changed your mind about with regard to the American economy?
Well, I did change my mind about not about NAFTA. I was always concerned about NAFTA. I couldn't publicize my concerns because I was Secretary of Labor in an administration that was supporting NAFTA, and it's always a trade-off. Ben, when you're in an administration that is doing something you don't want, I mean, do you resign, or do you think that you can do better by staying on at least for a time? And I chose the latter. No, I changed my mind about the causes of widening inequality. For many years, I thought the major causes were uh, globalization, that is international trade, and coupled with technological change. And that the people who are well educated and better prepared for technological change, and who are therefore also better insulated from low wage labor around the world as being competitors, those people would do well, and everybody else, less insulated, less educated, would do poorly. To me, that explained most, if not all, of widening inequality. Well, my mind changed in the sense that I realized I looked at the data. I watched what was happening. I watched very closely how votes were taken in Congress, and it seemed to me now this. What I'm about to say is not going to be earth-shattering to anybody who's listening, but it seemed to me that it wasn't just or even primarily trade and technological change, that I was missing a very big factor, and that was power that came from big money. That big money in our election system was actually changing the rules of the market in favor of people who were wealthy, and against everybody else. That's where the rigging of the game came in, and I actually published a few pieces in the American Prospect, saying that I had changed my mind, or at least I had not fully understood the role of big money and power, and I had put too much emphasis on technological change and on globalization as being the drivers of widening inequality.
Yes, and listeners can read all about that in the UK prospect as well to get a plug in for my own brand. Moving on from this book that you've written to a documentary that's recently come out, it's called The Last Class. It's around your time as a college professor. You're a college professor for many years, but recently you retired, and this documentary captures your last class. So you talk about teaching young people economics today, and you say that your students are often very pessimistic about the future. Some are even saying that they are members of the last generation, for instance. What do you make of the attitudes of your young students, and are you worried about their economic and political outlook?
Well, I'm worried about their outlook in the sense that I think that pessimism is fine and it's understandable. But if it dips into cynicism and hopelessness, then I do worry because I think cynicism and hopelessness uh, are kind of the last refuges for people who don't feel that they have a responsibility or ability or agency to change the system. And if it's not going to be young people, I don't know who it's going to be. I just very recently gave the commencement address at Berkeley to all, I guess it was about 10,000 undergraduates and their 30,000 parents and relatives and significant and insignificant others who watched. And I told them in no uncertain terms that we are relying on them uh, in terms of this battle between democracy and authoritarianism, in terms of making the system fairer, embracing social justice. We're relying on them, and that they must not fall into cynicism.
Yeah, so going from your young students to your old friend Alan Simpson, the late Republican senator, one of the surprising things that I found in your book was that you actually maintained some sort of lifelong friendships with some quite conservative Republicans. I would guess, however, that a young Robert Reich going to work in Washington today would probably not find as many friends across the aisle. So, what was different about your political foes of yesteryear that enabled you to have those sort of friendships compared to those, political foes that you encountered today? And do you consider bipartisanship to be something that we should aspire to anymore, or that we should just give up on?
There's been a profound change, Ben, in the Republican Party. It used to be a political party, a potentially uh, capable of governing. In the 1990s and even in the first part of the century, I knew many of them. I had worked with many of them. I respected many of them. I'm talking about Republicans, senators, and representatives in Congress. But now they are no longer a governing party. They are more closely to my way of thinking and also what I've seen. They no longer have any purpose other than rubber stamping what Donald Trump wants. He has purged the Republican Party of anybody who is not supportive of him personally. This is where the Trump dictatorship, neo-fascist dictatorship, comes in. The Republican Party is now part of that. There are many Republicans, people who call themselves Republicans, who are still quite loyal to the country, the Constitution, who understand the importance of separation of powers, and who respect the rule of law. But the current Republicans, post Donald Trump purging of the Republican Party, really are just a rubber stamp, and they're a frightening group of people. I think they're closely analogous to a criminal enterprise. I mean, I'm only slightly exaggerating here. They're like a mafia because he's like a mafia boss. And I know if I were in Washington now, I would not work with them. Most of them. I mean, there may be one or two left, but as we speak, he is in the process of getting rid of the last ones who are opponents of his.
Yeah, so turning to the Democratic Party side, in your book, you say that in combating the economic bullies, you ultimately came up short. Your generation came up short. That's where the title comes from. But I wonder, pardon the pun, if you might be selling yourself a bit short there. I guess each Democratic administration since you served in the Clinton one, it's moved, I would say, incrementally further towards the left on economics, in part, I would say, due to your advocacy. So when you look at some of the new generation of Democrats, I'm thinking, AOC, Mamdani, for instance, are you not hopeful? And how, in your view, should Democrats like these stand up to Trump and the other economic bullies that you identify in years to come?
Well, I'm very hopeful, but I'm also very critical of the Democratic Party because, yes, I think Mamdani is terrific. He's mayor of New York. AOC is a great congresswoman. Bernie Sanders is still still there. I root him on. I just can't believe he has the energy that he does. And there are a few other Democrats who are really stating what needs to be done. But there are too many Democrats who still believe that what the Democratic Party ought to do is move to the center. I mean, they're presidential candidates, people who have declared their interest in being president, for example, Rahm Emanuel, who really have no idea or don't demonstrate any idea of what the real stakes are these days. I mean, the problem is you've got a bunch of extraordinarily wealthy people, not every billionaire, but extraordinarily wealthy people, many of them billionaires, who are taking over the country, have taken over the country, who don't want democracy. Peter Thiel, for example, who is a Silicon Valley mega billionaire who managed to finance J.D. Vance senatorial campaign when Vance became a senator from Ohio, and then pushed Trump to make J.D. Vance his vice president in 2024. Thiel doesn't like democracy. He's publicly written about the fact that democracy is incompatible with freedom, to his point of view. Well, these people, I respectfully disagree. In fact, I don't respectfully disagree. I don't think they're entitled to much respect. And Democrats who think that the future of the Democratic Party is somewhere halfway between where these people are and where democracy is, just don't get it. We've got to seriously embrace social justice. We've got to change the tax code in ways that dramatically increase taxes on the very wealthy. We need to have a wealth tax in the United States. We need to do many, many other things. I could bore you and bore your listeners by giving a very long list of things that have to be done. But this is really urgent. This is an emergency in the United States. This is not a matter of, oh, it would be nice. No, we've now come to a turning point. And if we don't turn in the appropriate direction, we're going to lose our democracy, and the entire world is going to suffer, as the world is now suffering because of Donald Trump.
On the point of wealth taxes, I'd just give a quick plug to listeners that I did an interview with the economist Gabriel Zuckman recently on how to tax wealth, basically, which they might be interested in. I've got one last question for you, if that's all right, Robert, and it's a little bit of a pivot away from American politics, which we've been talking about here mainly. We're a British magazine here at Prospect, and there's obviously a lot going on in British politics at the moment. You spent some time here as a young man. You came over on the boat, as you write in your book, with Bill Clinton, both Rhodes Scholars to study at Oxford, and you spent some time here. I'd be interested in your take on what's going on in the UK at the moment, particularly economically, and there is similarly to the Democrats in the US, in UK Labour at the moment, there is a big debate around economic policy, around what the party is going to do. Wealth taxes have been brought up, lots of ideas are bouncing around at the minute. So how many to what extent do you think your economic ideas, you've mostly focused on the US, do you think they apply to the UK context as well?
Ben, I think now it's presumptuous of me to say what the UK should do, and I've tried to refrain from saying that, or any other country. But since you asked, yes, of course. I mean, the UK and much of Europe, and even Japan, Australia, Canada, they're moving in the direction of the United States in terms of inequality and power in the hands of a few people who are extraordinarily wealthy. Now, you have better laws and constraints on big money in politics than we do. So you're not quite as endangered as we are. But your Labor Party has shown, unfortunately, a degree of timidity about these things that I think is completely inappropriate right now, given where the world is. And I would urge everyone in the UK to demand of their politicians a bolder and more imaginative kind of politics. Yes, a wealth tax is absolutely critical. A social welfare net that is much more generous. We're moving into AI, artificial intelligence, that's going to take a huge number of jobs away. We've got to have, in my humble opinion, we've got to have universal basic income. And the UK should be a leader in establishing a universal basic income. I could go on, but you get my drift. We've got to have leaders around the world, in Europe and elsewhere in democracies, that understand the critical turning point we are now at. And in no way kind of compromise with the right wing.
Thank you so much for making time to speak to us today.
Thank you, Ben.